Well, let's talk through some of the wider diplomatic context now with Keir Giles, a Russia expert with Chatham House. Welcome to the programme. We were speaking not so many days ago, Keir, where you said you believed that this was now inevitable. It must not feel all that good to be proved right.
No, that's absolutely right. And of course, it's not just me that has been proved right, but now we see the warnings that have been coming from US and the UK and the other intelligence service and open source watchers that have been watching this Russian military buildup, that it was in fact leading towards a full-scale invasion. Many didn't believe them. And of course, that includes the Europeans, who are always looking for a diplomatic way out of this problem. But now they have been proved right, and all of those warnings are coming true.
And when we look at the Europeans who've been looking for that diplomatic solution, it must be said, of course, that the Defence Secretary and the Foreign Secretary of this country went to Moscow, but so too did the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France. I'd posit to you that all of those politicians are now looking relatively humiliated and were sort of playing Putin's game, traipsing into Moscow to only be dressed down and sent away in a grand show that really was just a sort of exercise by Putin and not gaining any gains at all.
Well, it's true that a lot of the diplomacy was futile because it was repeating the same Western messages to Russia that had already been rejected by Russia, and was hearing the same complaints from Russia that make no sense in a Western context. And of course, a lot of those complaints have now been clarified by President Putin in his long speech on Monday, effectively asking for the return of the Russian Empire. But I'd make a strong exception there for Ben Wallace, the UK's Defence Secretary, who made a very different impression when he arrived in Moscow, had very clear and businesslike conversations with his Russian opposite number, and then stood out from the crowd of politicians when he was giving a press conference afterwards, being very practical and hard-headed about what exactly an invasion of Ukraine would mean and where the UK stood on that.
And what does this now mean for the UK? We're expecting a huge tranche of sanctions likely to be announced in the House of Commons later today. But what is the appetite in the West more widely for anything further? And will sanctions actually deter what many people view as someone who does not quite have control of all of his marbles in the Kremlin?
Well, it would be nice to think that the huge tranche of sanctions that have been promised will actually happen. I have to say, in the case of the UK, that will be quite a surprise, given the resistance that we've seen over the years to sanctioning Russia where it hurts, to targeting the personal fortunes of President Putin and those around him who have stolen so much from the Russian people and squirreled it away in the West, including in London. That enabler industry across London, the parasitic forces that actually feast on the funds that are coming in from Russia, have mounted such a successful resistance to actually enacting anti-money laundering legislation and then acting on it, that it will be very encouraging if we do see proper steps taken by the UK. More broadly, of course, this has to be a wake-up call to all of those countries that are arguing that actually Russia was acting in defensive motivations and that it would not move further against Europe. Now, we've seen very clearly from what President Putin has said that his ambition is not limited to Ukraine. All of the countries that formerly were under Moscow's control should now consider themselves under threat and should be preparing their defenses.
And just in our final few seconds here, briefly, if you will, where does China fit into this? We're hearing that China may well step into the game to finance Russia if they're cut off from Western financial systems.
Well, Russia has played very carefully with China and didn't want to have a repeat of the shock that they had in 2014 when they seized Crimea and didn't get the support from China that they were expecting. So there's been very intense diplomatic activity on the part of Putin trying to get China on side. Whether or not they've actually succeeded, we'll only see as the sanctions play out over the next few days.